Hello, and welcome along to the Property Academy podcast by Opus Partners. I'm your host, Tim McKnight.
And I'm Andrew Nicol.
And today's show, we're talking about how to buy the house that your tenants actually want. And I'm so excited because I've got a brand new tool for you where you are going to be able to research your suburbs, the suburbs you're investing in a way that you never have been able to before. Now, what this means is it's going to help you buy the right property, which means it's going to be easier for you to find a tenant. It's going to be easier to keep a tenant. Maybe even your vacancy periods will be lower and your tenants will stick around for longer. So you can use this tool to figure out what sort of properties your tenants want in the specific area you're looking at. Now, we call it the tenant tool, and it's free to use. You don't have to pay anything. You don't have to sign up. You just pop your suburb in, and it gives you some details about it. So, Andrew, let's test this out to find out the sort of properties that tenants are actually renting in New Zealand. What suburb do you want to look at?
Let's start with somewhere that I've looked at recently, Mount Albert.
Okay, Mount Albert. Let's take a little look-see at that. So Mount Albert is an Auckland-based suburb. And so what are we seeing here? What sort of tenants do we have in Mount Albert?
So 60% of the people are single families, and then you've got single people at 20%, and very few are flatting or two families.
And what always sticks out to me is that 20% of the people who are renters in Mount Albert are just one person living in that property. Now, what's interesting is when we can dig a little bit deeper into, well, who are these single families? So what does that look like? Because a single family could be a couple. So that's two people living in there, or it could be a couple with children, or it could be, a couple with children and maybe a flatmate in there. And what's interesting about Mount Albert, what makes up the largest percentage, Andrew?
The couples with children, which is 40.83%, so quite a high percentage.
Yeah, that is quite unusual. And I'll show you that in a second. So typically couples only, so just two people living together, that is often the most popular configuration of these families. But the fact that there are couples with children, that tells me you're more likely to rent to a traditional family if you're buying in Mount Albert. And that probably comes into the number of bedrooms you need as well. Actually, this is quite surprising to me. How many bedrooms are most popular with tenants in Mount Albert?
2 bedrooms, which that's relatively surprising because it's a fairly affluent area. I thought it'd be higher than that.
I thought it would be 3 bedrooms because, again, it's couples with kids or a kid. And so I thought it would be 3 bedrooms would be more popular, or 4 bedrooms. But actually, surprisingly, 2 bedrooms are the most popular or most common number of bedrooms that a rental property has currently in Mount Albert. We could also see some data about their incomes and also their cars. So how many cars does the average renter or tenant household in Mount Albert have?
Well, over 50% of the tenants have 1 or 0 cars. So you could accept that maybe 1 car park is absolutely fine in an area like this. Once you get to above that, it makes up a fraction of the people, particularly when you get to 3 or 4 cars.
Who are the 3.8% of Mount Albert tenants who have 4 cars? I mean, maybe it's a flatting situation. And the other thing that's really cool about this is we can start to compare different suburbs. So if I click compare another suburb and I put in Mount Eden, which is not that far away from Mount Albert, also in Auckland, we start to see some differences. Wow. So in Mount Eden, we have that trend that I talked to you about before. You have more couples rather than couples with children. The ages are a little bit older in Mount Eden. So you have fewer young kids. You have more people in their 20s who are renting properties there. Well, that probably tells me you've got more flatting situations and more of those couples living there rather than families with young kids. And because of that, you see way more properties that have only 1 bedrooms. So a third of people who live in Mount Eden who are tenants have 1 bedroom. Whereas that compares to about just over an eighth of, or 1 in 8 tenants in Mount Albert that have 1 bedroom in their properties. So this just shows you the sort of property you're going to purchase if you're an investor. It's quite different between Mount Albert and Mount Eden. Now, I think most investors historically have known that. Hey, if you're buying in one sort of area, the right type of property for the tenants who live there is going to be different from another sort of area. This gives you guys the data and puts you in the driver's seat where you can access this data that you've never been able to before. Now, one thing that I would be interested in, Andrew, to get your opinion on is of all of this data here, we've got stuff about ages, we've got stuff about incomes, we've got stuff about cars. Which is the most important data to pay attention to and which is not as important?
So I think the things I'd focus on if I were picking an investment that was fit for purpose is number of bedrooms, because you want to know that you're going to be able to cater to the majority of people, but also the number of car parks or garage space, I think, is a really important one as well. I think we get too caught up thinking about how many car spaces we have, or what, we've got a double garage, so we think that tenants might like a double garage. Absolutely, they might. But if over 50% of the market only needs one car park, then just work with that, because we're trying to make the numbers work. The stuff that's probably less important, I kind of don't think the age or the incomes, that might give you a sense of who might be investing. So you might be thinking, okay, well, people in their late 20s with high incomes, they might be my tenants, but I wouldn't get as caught up on that as the other data.
Yeah, if there was, let's say there was a large percentage of renters who were like over 60, that's where you might start to say, well, I really need to buy a house that is single level. Now, you don't tend to see that because people who are older tend to own their own houses. But this does give you a sense of who your tenants are. And that's actually the reason that I initially built this, is I always got the question from property investors, what sort of person is going to rent my house? And so I thought, oh, well, I can probably go and get the data. And so we've gone and got it, crunched it in an interesting way, just so you can get a sense of, well, who might actually rent my house. And I think it's really important that in this case, we are not basing our investment decision or idea of who's going to rent this property on assumptions or opinions, is actually based on data. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think that's probably something that people who are newer investors often do wrong. So you might talk to a property manager. Nothing wrong with getting the opinion of a property manager, but often they'll be isolated in their experience. So they might say, hey, we've noticed that 2 bedrooms are renting out really well in this area. That might be true, but there might be a massive opportunity for 3 bedrooms because there are a lot of people with a family with 2 kids there. So you might want to find a property that can suit to those type of people.
So what problem would you say this tool is solving?
Well, you're actually going to have some data around what tenants are looking for. So you can take away what you think you might find a tenant would want for that area. And again, you can ignore those opinions and actually look at the data of what do tenants actually want or need in this area, and then make your investment decisions based on that. Because we're trying to eliminate as much vacancy as possible. We're trying to get a tenant as quickly as possible, and we're trying to make sure we get the maximum rent.
The main thing is, we always say to people, don't focus on what you want, focus on what the tenant wants. Well, how do you figure out what the tenant wants? Well, we've now got the data and you guys can access it for free. And one thing that's interesting is I was just speaking to Nikki from the Taranaki Property Investors Association about this. Now, she's the president there and she's a property manager. And we were talking about this, and she was telling me that she had just done a rental appraisal for some investors who I think owned quite a number of properties. I think they owned like 7 properties. And she asked them, well, who are your target tenants? Who's going to rent this place off you if you renovate it like you're planning to do? And she said even though they weren't starting out, they owned a lot of properties, they were stumped by the question. They couldn't actually answer it. And so she was saying to me, well, actually, maybe this is a good tool to have. It kind of backs up this theory that we have that a lot of property investors don't actually consider, well, who is the tenant when we purchase this property? So here we go. You can access that. I'll just tell you as well, the link will be down in the show notes, but it's at opuspartners.co.nz/tenant-tool. If you Google Opus Tenant Tool, it'll be the first thing that comes up.
And so lots of people are going to ask the question, well, where's the data coming from, Ed?
So at the moment, this is pulled out of Stats NZ. And so they do the census every year. The census results are about to come out. This is currently based on the 2018 census. So it is a few years old right now because the latest data isn't out yet, but it will be soon. Now, that is a limitation, but what I would say is some data is better than no data. So some people will hear that this data actually comes from 2018 right now and be like, oh, it's a complete waste of time. It's not actually useful. But if you're just basing your decisions on your own opinions and not actually any facts, as I said, some data is going to improve your decision making compared to no data at all. And I think that's the key thing is data helps improving the quality of the decision you make. So the question is, well, are you going to make a better decision using some data that's a few years old or no data at all? I would say something is better than nothing. One other kind of weakness within this data that I want to point out, because some of you will be thinking about it, is, well, what about what's called induced demand? So in Mount Eden, we said a lot of people are renting one-bedroom properties. And you might say to me, well, Ed, maybe a whole heap of people are renting one-bedroom properties in Mount Eden because there are a lot of one-bedroom properties available there. So that doesn't necessarily tell me that one-bedroom properties are the best investment properties in Mount Eden. It just tells me that potentially there are a lot of them there. So you might even say, maybe there aren't as many tenants renting 5-bedroom homes because there aren't many 5-bedroom rental properties there. And if that's true, maybe I should actually buy a 5-bedroom house, even though the data tells me, and I'm not sure yes, I do have it right in front of me. The data tells me that 5-bedroom properties aren't very popular. Maybe that is just because there aren't many 5-bedroom properties there. And that is completely true. That is an absolutely fair point. So this data doesn't tell you what tenants want. It doesn't tell you if there is an unmet need in the market. To get that data, you'd need to do a survey or something along those lines. But what I would also say is if I am thinking about starting a food company, and I know that 90% of people eat milk chocolate. I'm making up this number, but 90% of people eat milk chocolate and very few people eat white chocolate. Well, I'm probably not going to say, well, maybe a whole heap of people don't eat white chocolate because they've never had good white chocolate before. So I'm probably not going to think that. I'm probably going to say, I'm going to make milk chocolate because I have evidence that people are willing to pay money for my milk chocolate. And so I'm going to go and look at that rather than trying to say, I'm going to make the best white chocolate possible and I'm going to convince the world that they need to buy my good white chocolate. It's not the perfect analogy, but it probably gives you an
interesting one.
But it gives you a sense of, well, okay, it's true that there could be an unmet need. Now, if you want to be really entrepreneurial, you could go and figure that out. But for me, I would say, well, there's a lot of 2-bedroom properties at a place like Addington, Christchurch. So I know that tenants are willing to rent them. I know there is demand there. I know that if I lose a tenant, I can probably find another one because there are lots there. And that gives me the confidence to invest. Now, if I did a survey, maybe I could find out that actually they do all want 5-bedroom properties. But I don't have that data to hand. I don't have that evidence there right now, right?
And also I think there's flaws with surveys that people might say that they want something, but are they willing to pay for it? These people are paying for it.
And are they willing to pay a price that is going to make my investment worth it? So I guess what I'm saying, or rather what I'm not saying is, I'm not saying don't go and buy a 5-bedroom house as a rental property. I'm just saying make sure you can rent it out first and that you can find a good tenant. Whereas, as I said, with a 1 or a 2-bedroom property in Mount Eden, I already have the evidence that I can rent it out and that there are lots of tenants who are available. So that gives me some good confidence there. Again, this tool is available for free for you. opuspartners.co.nz/tenant-tool. Or if you could just find it on our website or just Google Opus Partners Tenant Tool. It'll be the first thing that comes up. Link is down in the show notes. So tap or swipe over the cover art. It'll be in there. Or if you want to see us play around with the tool, and you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, just Google Opus Partners YouTube. You'll be able to see us using it. If you guys are watching on YouTube as well, make sure you hit subscribe. We release new videos every Monday and Wednesday. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Knight.
I'm Andrew Nicol.
We're going to be back again tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics, and insights to help you get the most at the New Zealand property market. Until next time.